Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversation. Today we will be discussing the state of India's defense preparedness and defense reforms. As a matter of fact, on the 18th of April this year, the Government of India appointed yet another high-level committee called the Defense Planning Committee to recommend, and I quote, policy measures to improve India's defense capability and preparedness and the country's national security in general. The question, however, is whether we need more committees to tell us what needs to be done in order to beef up and improve India's defense preparedness and defense reforms. After the Kargil War of 1999, we had the Kargil Review Committee of 1999 chaired by Mr. K. Subramaniam. The Group of Ministers Committee, the report came out in 2001. The task force, one of the task forces was on management of defense chaired by Mr. Arun Singh, and the Satish Chandra Committee of 2001 and several more before the Kargil War of 1999. What has happened to all those recommendations that these committees have given to the Government of India? Have any of them been implemented over the years by the Government of India? To talk to us about this and more, about defense preparedness in general and about national security in particular, today we have with us Admiral Arun Prakash. Admiral Arun Prakash was the chairman, Chiefs of Staff Committee from 2005 to 2007. He was the Navy Chief from 2004 to 2006. He was the first Commander-in-Chief of the Andaman and Nicobar Command from 2001 to 2002. He is today a prolific columnist and undoubtedly one of India's finest strategic thinkers. Admiral Prakash, welcome to the National Security Conversation.
Thank you.
What is your considered view on India's defense preparedness today? I am asking this question with a certain background in mind. The CAG report tabled in the Indian Parliament in July 2017 raises serious concerns about India's defense preparedness and capabilities. In fact, the latest report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense states on the Indian Navy, an institution that you were part of once, most of the modernization projects in the Indian Navy are either deferred or are on hold because of inadequate funds. On the Indian Air Force, the report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defense says, the Air Force submitted to the committee that defense budget deficit leads to inability to procure spares and fuel. On the Indian Army, the Vice Chief of the Army Staff said that 68% of the Army's weapon systems are in vintage condition, which is way below acceptable standards. And the Army faces critical shortage of good quality bulletproof vests, arms and ammunition, assault rifles, battle tanks, and surveillance and monitoring equipments. On the other hand, India is the world's 5th largest defense spender. India is also the world's largest arms importer. In other words, we spend so much on defense. It is not as if we are not spending money. And yet, there is this acute shortage of basic material and ammunition. What explains this gap, Admiral Prakash?
Well, there's no one-line answer to this question of yours, but you're right, it's a pretty bleak picture. And the other point is that this is not new. If you look up on the internet, the CAG reports are placed on the House of Parliament and on the table of Parliament. Right. They are available in the open domain, as are the reports of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Defence. And year after year, these two bodies have pointed out similar lacunae and voids and so on. But the sad thing is that when these reports are referred to the Ministry of Defence, they are pretty dismissive of them, and actually nothing happens. And in fact, the Parliamentary Committee often calls up the Defence Secretary the following year and questions him, why haven't these points been actioned? And they are dismissive, I won't say contemptuous, but the MOD is dismissive of them. So you're right, we spend a lot of money, we spend 45-50 billion US dollars, but we are certainly not getting a bang for it. And we are the biggest importer of weapons. And this will continue because the system that we are using to ensure national security is a dysfunctional system.
Now, what does that mean? I don't quite get that. You spend so much money and you get very little out of that. Where is the gap? What is missing here?
Well, first of all, the money is not spent in the year that it is allocated in, because the system is so slow that what Parliament allocates for defence is not always spent in that year. At the end of the year, the unspent money lapses. The Ministry of Finance grabs it and puts it into some other kitty. So this is a bit of a misleading figure, that you are getting so many 1,000 crores for defence. The system is so inefficient and dysfunctional that it is unable to spend the money allocated by Parliament to it for capital expenditure, for modernization. And the delays within the MOD are so long. There are very often contracts expire, etc. So these figures are quite misleading. That's one point. The other point is a huge proportion of the budget, defense budget, is spent on revenue. Revenue means fuel, maintenance, pay and allowances of your personnel. In case of the army, the proportion is now some 80 to 20, which is really disastrous. The Navy is better off, it's about 50-50. 50% on revenue, 50% on modernization. The Air Force is somewhere there. But the army is so bloated and they have not managed their affairs as they should have. So the proportion has become distorted. So you can spend money, but if you're paying most of it to your men, then that's where it goes. You don't modernize, you don't re-equip, you don't get spares, you don't get ammunition. So these are the kind of things that the Ministry of Defence is supposed to manage. That's why there's a ministry, there's a Minister of Cabinet rank to ensure that money allotted to national security is spent in the manner it should be.
In other words, there is a lack of optimal utilization of the resources that have been allocated for purchases or expenditure. Would you say that is accurate?
Well, optimal doesn't describe the system. I would use a stronger word, and I would say the system is dysfunctional in the system in which the armed forces, who are the users, who know where the shoe pinches, who know actually how and where the money should go, are not in the driving seat. They are outside the Ministry of Defence. In the driving seat are a set of people who are either...
I'll come to that in a second. We'll talk about the systems. But I just want to understand. You're basically saying the defence planning system in India today is absolutely dysfunctional.
It is.
Okay, let's now talk about defence reform, something that you're sort of pointing towards. What is the state of the reforms that have been suggested by the Kargil Review Committee? What is the state of that?
Well, if you read the Kargil Review Committee, it's in the open domain. It was it was brutally critical of the system as it exists, of defence preparedness, of the higher defence management, of intelligence, of civil-military relations. All these were pointed out and critiqued by Mr. Subramaniam and his team. And fortunately, the government of the day, which happened to be an NDA government, took instant cognizance. They constituted a committee, a group of ministers under the Deputy Prime Minister. And they issued a very fine set of recommendations. Had those been implemented in toto or even substantially, none of what has happened since 2000 would have happened. So largely the implementation has been half-hearted, cosmetic, and totally devoid of substance.
Just to add to what you said, the Kargil Review Committee in 1999 said that the political, bureaucratic, military and intelligence establishments appear to have developed a vested interest in the status quo. That's quite a stunning and stinging statement coming from a report that was prepared by a former bureaucrat himself.
Yeah. So the system has become so immune to criticism that they took very little notice of this.
So what is the root cause of all this? Is it the dysfunctional state of civil-military relations? Are you sort of satisfied with the current state of civil-military relations in India? Or you think there's scope for improvement?
Let's look a little more deeply. There are three stakeholders in national security. The politician. The politician is at this moment our era so deeply preoccupied with electioneering and electoral politics that he has no time to spare for national security. He's also aware at the back of his mind that there are no votes in national security. In Karnataka, nobody is asking questions about national security, for example. Right. The next stakeholder is the bureaucrat. The bureaucrat is a temporary occupant of a chair in the Ministry of Defense. He has no stake, he has no concern. If things go seriously wrong in the national security domain, he would have moved to some other ministry. He came from some ministry, he spent some time in the MOD and he moved on. He has no stake. He lacks comprehension of serious national security issues, especially those relating to technology, acquisitions, etc. And the third stakeholder is the armed forces, who unfortunately have been very parochial and very short-sighted. So with these three actors being the way they are, it's not surprising that we are in.
But you don't disagree with the point about civilian supremacy as far as armed forces are concerned, that the civilians should be in charge of what the armed forces should be doing, unlike Pakistan, for instance.
Civilians should be in charge. You heard of Clausewitz's dictum that war has no logic to it unless there's a political underpinning. Absolutely. So civilians should be in charge. The Prime Minister will fight the next war or any war. The Prime Minister will push the red button if a nuclear discharge is to take place. So where's the question? The civilians must take charge. But it is not the bureaucratic civilians. It is the elected leadership of the country must take charge of the armed forces. But they have been derelict in their duty. To politicians, they've farmed off the responsibility to the bureaucrat, who's neither involved seriously nor comprehends nor has a stake in national security. That is the flaw.
So this is not civilian supremacy, you would say this is civil service supremacy.
It is, exactly.
You know, you've been very critical of the Indian bureaucracy. To quote you, you said, you wrote once, the fate of our military thus depend on a Ministry of Defense which is run exclusively by civilian officers of the IAS and IDAS. An acute lack of military expertise in the MOD and an absence of collegiate consultation between civilians and service headquarters have ensured that all discussions take place through file notings. So do you think the bureaucracy has been opposing the integration of the MOD with the service headquarters? Do you think that's a good idea, and why should that happen? For our viewers, if you could explain that to us.
Well, if you look at the way things work now, if there is a case to be pushed for, take for example, you want to buy a submarine. So Naval Headquarters, which is outside the Ministry of Defense, will write down on a file the reasons why a submarine needs to be bought. And then that file will be then presented to the Ministry of Defense. Right. In the Ministry of Defense, there are people who from all, the IAS is a very fine service. They run the country. They are experts in their own domain. But when they come to the Ministry of Defense, they are not experts in national security. It takes them a year or 2 years to learn all about national security, by which time they move on. They probably go back to their state cadre or go to a better job. So when it goes to a person like that, it takes him time to comprehend. If he doesn't understand, he has two choices. One is to ask somebody who's been there long enough to ask him what is this about, or to put the file in a drawer and shut it. And that is why cases take 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Can you imagine any reason why re-equipment of the artillery arm of the Indian Army should take 30 years? Or buying a trainer for the Indian Air Force should take 21 years? So that is the bureaucratic part of it. The integrated, the Defense Account Service are called integrated financial advisors. They do not advise. They wait for you to make a mistake, and then they jump on you and say, oh, you did this, that and the other, and throw the file back at you. Their loyalty is to the Ministry of Finance. So if they are called integrated financial advisors, they should be with me when I am drawing up my case and saying I want one submarine. They should justify for me and make my case watertight so that when it reaches the financial scrutiny, there is no flaw. But they don't do that.
What stops them from doing that?
Probably they'll lose their importance. It's much more important, the sense of importance is much more if you can return a file or reject a case and have it come back to you 20 times, rather than being party to formulation of a case which will go through in a year or 2 or 3 years.
But how do we circumvent a structural problem of this kind by integrating the service headquarters with the Ministry of Defense?
Right.
I mean, tell us from a technical point.
If I am the Defense Secretary and I have a case, complicated case before me, and which I don't understand, which is perfectly acceptable, then I call my additional secretary, who could be a Lieutenant General, and say, please sit down next to me and tell me what it is all about. So the Lieutenant General then calls his deputy, who can be a joint secretary of the IAS, and say, okay, let's sit around a table and discuss this. And let me clear all your doubts. And then whatever doubts are cleared, then they should be written on the file and the file goes off. Around a table, that's called a collegiate issue. And the Lieutenant General, after that there will be a civilian, a uniformed person, civilian, like that alternately. So this is the integration. So the expertise will be integrated, the financial advice will actually be integrated and then not sit in judgment. So the finance person sits here, the uniformed person sits here, the bureaucrat sits here, you sit around a table and resolve the issue.
But it's not just
now every file movement takes a month or 2 months. Often it comes back with the same query couched in different language. So this is an ideal way of delaying things. And one more thing which I forgot. The finance people owe their loyalty to the finance ministry. And nothing delights the finance ministry more than having a case cancelled or postponed, because they save 20,000 crores for the next year. They can use it for some other purpose. You can't blame them. So there is a vested interest here. Obviously, so you're a stake, you're empowered, and you carry with yourself all the technical knowledge, the background which the Ministry of Defence lacks, and you provide it there and then rather than through the medium of a file. So it will short circuit decision making by 500 times in my opinion. But this should be a structural plus then there are of course other issues, ego problems, people not getting along with each other, that those kind of things also come up.
I should ask you this, you've been a 4-star officer. What has been your personal experience in dealing with the Defence Ministry bureaucrats? You talked about egos.
As people, they are very fine people, they are professional, they are dedicated. But as a organization, the defence bureaucracy is it's obdurate, it's opaque, and I would say it's ossified. It belongs to World War II. It has no place in today's environment.
What is your opinion on the newly created Defence Planning Committee? It seems to have a lot of things on its plate. How can one single committee be looking after so many things? It is supposed to look at national security strategy, strategic defence review and doctrines, strategies to boost defence exports, roadmap to build defence manufacturing ecosystem under the National Security Advisor. How can one committee do all of that? What's your opinion on that?
So you pointed out in your introductory remarks that there are already organizations existing to look after all these issues. The Prime Minister has at his disposal the Cabinet Committee on Security. Right. He has the National Security Council. He has the National Security Advisory Board. There is a whole Ministry of Defence with a Cabinet Minister at the head of it. There are 3 service headquarters with huge staff. The chiefs are called Chief of Staff. Chief of Staff to whom? To the Prime Minister. And then there's the Integrated Defence Staff. So all these issues which you just mentioned, they can be given to any of these and they will provide necessary answers or options. And again, as you pointed out, they've all been looked at by various committees and task forces and groups and so on. The answers are all lying in the dusty cupboards of the Ministry of Defence. So the question is, why the Naresh Chandra committee report disappeared without trace? Yes. At least the group of ministers report is there in public domain. Naresh Chandra committee report, no one knows why it was convened and what happened to it. So now the first question is, what happened to those reports, their recommendations? Some of them are very valid, and much of the things that have gone wrong in the last decade need not have happened if some of those recommendations had been implemented. And then of course the question is that, are we ever going to have a Chief of Defence Staff? Or is this the answer to Chief of Defence Staff?
Well, that's actually my next question, but before I come to that, are you then saying that the Defence Planning Committee that was created last month is a superfluous organization? It's unnecessary. There is no need for it.
No, I will not say that. In fact, I would hesitate, because any step that the government of India takes in this direction of changing or reforming national security has to be welcomed prima facie. The doubts that you and I express are apprehensions. But if this committee actually, in the time given to it, which is I think less than a year, because if elections are preponed, then it may have 9-10 months. So in the time given to it and the vast charter allotted to it, if it produces something, great. Why should you preempt or prejudge this issue? So I will not say it is unnecessary, but I am just voicing the questions that most of us...
No, in the context of the several committees that have been formed in the past, in the context of the several reports that have been submitted to the government, is it yet another committee and another report? Is that what is likely to happen?
Well, going by past precedents, that is what has happened. That Governments convene committees, take their reports, and then fling them away because they think that public will be quite satisfied that they did something and went through the motion. So if that precedence is followed, then of course it's more of the same. But one can only hope for the best.
You refer to the issue of Chief of Defence Staff. How does the creation of a Defence Planning Committee under the chairmanship of the National Security Advisor impact on the existing demand for a Chief of Defence Staff, a 5-star officer as it were?
Well, that issue should have been addressed by now. If you look at the election manifestos of various parties, they all talk about this. But 4 years have passed, nobody has addressed this issue, and nobody has said why it is not feasible or cannot be done. Your question about why we are spending so much money and not getting bang for our buck is because we are not spending effectively. There is redundancy, there is duplication, there is superfluous expenditure. But if you were to have a Chief of Defence Staff, you were to integrate the Armed Forces headquarters with the ministry, and you were to integrate the 3 armed forces between each other, you could save 10, 15, 20%.
So who doesn't want the creation of a CDS then?
Oh, that's another lengthy question, but upfront the opposition comes from the bureaucracy, because the creation of a CDS seems to threaten the status and importance of the Defence Secretary, which is not really true. And if we have time, we can discuss that also. It also threatens some or all of the 3 services, that they will lose turf, they will lose authority, they will lose assets. So given the combination of these 2 opposing forces, no politician has had the time or the inclination or the mental space to sit down and say, who's right? Is national security really endangered? Does it need a Chief of Defence Staff? Does it need integration? Or are the bureaucrats right? Is the Indian Air Force right? And who should we listen to? I don't think they have time to reflect on these issues, unfortunately.
Admiral, you've been the chairman of the Chiefs of Defence, Chiefs of Staff
Committee.
How is that post different from the post of a CDS, the Chief of Defence Staff?
As different as chalk from cheese.
Please explain that for your viewers.
In the present system, the Chairman Chiefs of Staff Committee is one of the chiefs.
Right.
His full-time job is Chief of the Navy. My full-time job was looking after the Navy, maritime security.
Right.
Part-time, I was Chairman Chiefs of Staff Committee. It just so happened that my date of birth was such that I served for 20 months. My predecessor served for 1 month. The person from whom I took over Chairman Chief was served for 1 month. His predecessor had served for 6 months or 3 months. So the Chairman Chiefs of Staff Committee is in the nuclear command chain. He is responsible to the Prime Minister for the well-being of the nuclear deterrent.
Right.
Is he going to look after his own service? Or is he going to look after the Strategic Forces Command? Or is he going to look after all the joint issues that the chairman is supposed to look after? He's not. He's going to look after his service. His service comes first. So the Chairman Chiefs of Staff under the present dispensation is a part-time rotational job to which no good soldier, sailor or airman can give adequate time and attention. So we suggested that if Chief of Defence Staff is unpalatable to the politician, to the bureaucrat, then create something called a permanent Chairman Chiefs of Staff, who will be the 4th man in the COSC, who will be a full-time Chairman Chiefs of Staff. He will not be a chief of any of the services. If he is, then he will resign. He'll quit the job, become Chairman Chiefs of Staff Committee full-time. He will only look after the Strategic Forces Command, the joint formations, and he will work on integration of the 3 armed forces full-time. At this moment, nobody is bothered about integration or any issues which concern more than one service are looked after by the 2 services getting together and fighting for it. But when you have a permanent chairman or you have a Chief of Defence Staff, then any issue, operational, administrative, personnel, which concerns more than one service comes under his purview. And the integrated defence staff has already been set up by the group of ministers. It's in place. So all you need is a person to head it, who should be the Chief of Defence Staff.
But you also referred to the inter-service issues in terms of appointing a Chief of Defence Staff. Who stands to lose among the services?
Well, everybody feels that some authority will have to be given away, some territory will have to be, some command. Now, today we've got 17 commands. The three armed forces have 17 commands.
Right.
No two commands. I think two commands are together. No two commands are located in the same place. If we go to war today, then the 17 commands will be talking to each other by some means or the other and trying to coordinate their actions. This is unheard of. It doesn't happen anywhere else. You just saw what happened to the People's Liberation Army. They've reinvented themselves. They are down to 7 commands now.
But you have the Andaman Nicobar command in any case.
That's only one.
Is there an example that we should follow?
We should see where we need integrated command. But at least the headquarters can be integrated. Then certain commands can be integrated with each other wherever required or possible. I'm not saying integrate everybody. So if this happens, then each service will lose something. Okay, and some services are a little more insecure than the others, so they feel even more threatened. But the answer to this is not to ask the chiefs, not to ask the services, not to ask the bureaucrats, but some far-sighted politician should come along one day and say, India's national security requires an integrated system. So let's integrate. Finished.
But Admiral Prakash, these are two different things. One is the question of CDS, which will be, of course, objected to by, as you rightly pointed out, probably bureaucrats within the MOD. But the other is the integrated system. The civilians needed to object to an integrated system. We already have an example. So it's probably the resistance to an integrated command is probably coming from within the military itself.
No, but the two go hand in hand. If you integrate the armed forces, then you need a chief of defense staff. You can't have one without the other.
You can have a theatre commander.
You can have a theatre commander. Who will you report to? Army chief or a navy chief? No. If you have a theatre commander will report to the CDS. So the two go hand in hand. So this issues get blurred. So if you are opposed to CDS, then it suits you to oppose integration also.
Right. How do you view the mismatch between, in the light of this, mismatch between India's capabilities on the one hand and the changing nature of warfare, be it cyber, hybrid, space? Are we there yet? I mean, we are talking about turf wars and the civilian sort of civil services pushing down the military. And on the other hand, the nature of warfare is changing. So is there a drastic mismatch? Are we in trouble?
Well, I retired 10, 11 years ago, but in my last talk to the combined commanders with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, I did raise this point that we are getting left behind. This is 11 years ago. I don't know what's happened in the intervening decade, but from whatever I read or see or hear, I don't think much has changed. Whereas our adversaries, definitely China is years ahead. In fact, there's something called phase 0. Phase 1 is when the day the war starts. China believes in phase 0. The day before war starts, they will undertake massive cyber attack and leave you totally deaf, dumb and blind. So when the war starts tomorrow morning, you won't know where to look. So I don't know how well prepared we are for cyber warfare, for space warfare. We are very proud of our satellites. They've got anti-satellite devices, so they can bring down your space. Special warfare, integrated. Every kind of warfare is going to be integrated. If you're going to have armor, then the armor must have integrated helicopters with it. Where are we? We are still fighting on those kind of issues. So I have deep apprehensions that our system is archaic and quite unsuited for today's or tomorrow's warfare.
This is worrying because what you are saying means in layman's language that India's defense preparedness is in a very precarious situation today.
Well, everybody knows it. The CAG is telling you. In fact, one of my suggestions would be that the CAG report needs to be classified. And the Parliamentary Committee on Defence should also be classified, because we are putting all our weaknesses on the table. This would give great satisfaction and happiness to all our adversaries.
But hold on, Admiral. If you put these facts out, then people like us will talk about it, the general public will talk about it. If you don't put these facts out, nobody will know about it. Well, there will be no criticism.
But does it change anything?
It hasn't yet, but at least...
I just told you that these reports have been rendered for the last 15, 20 years. Has anything happened?
But there could be some
the emperor has no clothes. We know it and we keep pointing it out.
But there could be public pressure if you declassify these doctrines and
like
these
I
reports.
said, there are no votes in national security.
Okay, now that we talked about the
There's
reports.
roti, kapda, makan. Those are vital, and we are a poor country. We need to spend more on poverty and housing and than on this, which is all the more ironic because what we are spending on defense is not giving us the kind of defense we deserve.
You talked about the report, you talked about the CAG report and the Parliamentary Committee on Defense report. Let's talk about doctrines. In fact, a cursory reading of the Indian military doctrines, including the latest joint doctrine, tells you that there is very little originality in them. In fact, some people have even accused of plagiarism in these doctrines. What's your response to that? I mean, in particular about the question of the lack of jointness and the lack of a unified Indian military perspective. Are these sort of doctrines sort of conceived of, imagined and prepared in silos by various actors and various services and then sort of put out for consumption? Is there absolutely no jointness at all?
Well, perhaps you're close to the truth. The first joint doctrine was written in 2006 and I wrote the preface for it and I said it will be reviewed in 10 years. So somebody faithfully reviewed it in 10 years. But the point is that there was no need to review it because nothing had changed in those 10 years. Nothing had changed substantively. And the other drawback was that in this, the next edition of the joint doctrine, nobody took the pain or the risk of pointing out to the government or to the reader that look, all this could have happened, it has not happened. Things have changed. Pakistan has got tactical nuclear weapons. China has undertaken massive reforms. So many things have happened. But this new joint doctrine wasn't a very good piece of work because nothing had changed. It did not make any recommendations to the government to bring about any changes. There was no more jointness than there was in 2006 than it is today. So really it could have been delayed by 2 or 3 years more. Or if it was necessary to issue it, then it should have said something substantive to the government and said, look, 10 years have passed, what are we doing?
You wrote the 2006 joint doctrine.
I didn't write it, I wrote the foreword.
Right, but obviously you're part of the whole exercise. Are these doctrines a product of inter-service consultations, long-term strategic thinking and civil-military consensus and consultations? So are they sort of written by respective forces in their own silos?
Okay, the way a doctrine is supposed to emerge is that the government of India should issue a national security strategy. Okay, it should identify national interests, national aims, national security strategy. Then from the national security strategy should flow different service strategies, because if this is what the Republic of India wants, then this is how the Indian Navy will get it. But what has happened is the opposite, because the government of India failed for 65, 70 years to write anything or identify. So the Navy decided that, okay, let's, with whatever we know, referring to the constitution and directive principles and all that, they wrote out a strategy and a doctrine, hoping that somebody would read it, and if they didn't like something in it, they would tell us to change it. As it happened, I don't know who read it, nothing has changed.
So
the Navy has then now issued a second edition of it.
Right.
So, well, one good thing that happened is that perhaps the government is following what the Navy has written. If the Navy is not following what the government forgot to write, this is the reverse.
So there was no prior consultation with the civilian bosses or with the bureaucrats on what the doctrine should contain?
No government has ever asked any service to write a doctrine or a strategy.
But you could
consult. Because the service the chief will turn around and say, where is the national strategy? What am I supposed to write on? So in the absence of it, since we were buying hardware, we were spending money, we had to train our people, we said, let's form a doctrine and a strategy. And if the government of India doesn't like it, we will change it according to their prescriptions.
But Admiral Prakash, I've read through these doctrines, and one gets the feeling that many references are made to Sun Tzu, the Chinese thinker, or European thinkers. Hardly any reference to the Indian traditional warfare or Indian way of looking at war and peace. Why is that? I mean, is that so? Does it mean that there is no considered amount of thinking going into the development of these doctrines?
the last Navy, last admiral we had was Kanoji Angre, whom the British called a bandit or a pirate. So we've had a huge gap in our military tradition from the time that India as such had a military tradition or an army or a navy. From there has been 1,000 years or more till 1947 when we started ourselves. So this is a beginning. So we borrow, we read Clausewitz, we read Mahan, we read Sun Tzu, it doesn't matter. We also read Chanakya also, but there are not enough lessons in, have you read the Arth Shastra?
I have.
Undercut your enemies and so on. So there is no real meat. Hopefully, after a few years or few decades or centuries, there will be an Indian tradition, maritime tradition. So this is the start of or the revival of a maritime tradition which we had and which we forgot about.
So just to understand, before a joint doctrine is prepared, there are inter-service consultations.
Joint doctrine, yes, but individual service doctrine, very limited. Because it talks about, maritime doctrine talks about how to employ the Navy.
But in any case, there is no point in talking about doctrines unless and until you have a certain jointness notionally within the Indian Armed Forces, right? I mean, structurally there is no jointness.
Notionally there is supposed to be.
It's supposed to be.
Yes. Tomorrow, if you have to go to do something in Andamans, none of the three services can do it alone. Or we went to the help of Maldives in 1987. All three services took part. But there is no doctrine to tell you how to do it. So on the day of the event, then possibly they'll come together, sit down and say, okay, what should we do? That's the whole point. That these things are supposed to be institutionalized, they are supposed to be written down, like the United States, like UK. There is a jointness is a religion for them.
And let me ask you a slightly different question. There seems to be an increasing tendency among the military leadership in India to talk to the public and to the media on national security issues, even when the defense minister or the prime minister do not necessarily talk about these things in such great details. Is that a good tradition? Is that a great idea to have the military leaders talk in detail about the 2.5 front wars or things of that kind? Or should it not be the job of the elected political leaders of the country?
Well, if you want me to criticize the chiefs, I'm not going to do that. But the point is well taken that people in uniform should talk to their soldiers, to their generals and speak their hearts and minds to them. Speaking in public or to the media is it's a minefield. No matter what you say, the media is going to twist it and dramatize it. So I think prudence demands that one should be very careful and sparing with whatever one says in public. It invariably bounces back. Now the question, your second part of your question is that are the politicians inciting these people to say so? That would be a sad day because armed forces are not supposed to make public policy statements on behalf of politicians.
They have in the recent past.
I don't know what you're referring to, but it's not supposed to happen.
I mean,
and neither should the politician ask the soldier, nor should the soldier accept it.
The army chief recently said, for example, referring to a particular northeastern state, that a Muslim-dominated party is growing faster than the BJP there. It was, to some extent, could be read as a
I have
partisan
no
sort of
comment.
statement.
I have no comment at all. He's
Okay.
a senior general, he knows what he's doing.
All right, let me ask you a different question. You've sort of written about domestic arms production. You've sort of been critical of importing arms. You said you should strengthen the domestic defense industry, arms industry. Why reinvent the wheel? I mean, this may be a silly question from my side. Why reinvent the wheel of defense production, etc., in the age of defense globalization? You're talking about buying weapons or weapon systems or parts or parts and parcel from various parts of the world. Why do you have to reinvent the wheel and produce everything at home in order to strengthen your own defense industry? Is that even possible?
Well, a fighter aircraft or a submarine or a radar is not a wheel. If something goes wrong in a radar, for example, if the transmitter goes bad and you want another one, you will have to write to Ukraine or Russia or Germany or France or Israel. You think they'll give it to you tomorrow? And they'll give it for whatever price you bought it for? No way, sir. Any replacement takes months. That is why all the reports that you're citing, CAG report, parliamentary, this is the problem. Since we don't make military hardware here at home and 75% is imported from abroad and Russia doesn't provide you overnight. They take 6 months, 1 year. So while that thing is coming, your aircraft is sitting on the ground collecting dust, or your submarine is tied up alongside. That is the reason. So in national security, you have to be, if you want to be a great power, regional power, all that rubbish, then you have to be self-reliant. One of the first things that the People's Republic of China did when they threw out the Russians in the 1960s, they kept all their hardware, they kept all their drawings and designs, they reverse engineered for 10 years till they could make everything. It was crude, it was unreliable, but they had it, it was made in China. Today, China is exporting sophisticated weapons, they are going to be equal to China. So this, your question, I'm glad you asked this question, but if you want to be a military power or any kind of a power, you must be able to produce military hardware. Dependence on anyone, even your closest friend. Russia was our closest friend. Today, when a MiG-29 is grounded, it takes 2 to 3 years to get a spare part from Russia. So what happens? How do you fight a war? So there is no getting away from this. You have to reinvent the wheel your way. If the wheel is not good enough, then just make do with it till it becomes good.
But this also then means you have to somehow reform the defense industrial establishment within the country. There is a serpentine defense industrial bureaucracy in India that needs to be reformed.
Yeah, but that again, only the politician can do. Only a politician with vision which extends beyond the next election. That vision should be 15, 20, 25 years and say, okay, India will make a fighter aircraft and we will make it successful. Till it is successful, we will keep importing from here. India will make a jet engine. India will make a tank. It will make a submarine. No matter how long it takes, scientists are good at their job. They are brilliant people. They are not project managers. You tell them, okay, Dr. So-and-so, get this going. He'll say yes and he'll become the project director or management. But he doesn't have that kind of. So you need to create mission mode projects and say, okay, fighter has to be made. Let's go. All the money that's required, all the manpower that's required. But only a political leader can provide that kind of vision, direction, guidance and sight. Unfortunately, if we can't look beyond the next election, this vision will be absent.
Admiral Prakash, you've been a prolific and enlightening writer, and I've been following your writings very religiously. Could you, for the benefit of our viewers, provide a few recommendations, long-term policy recommendations to improve India's defense preparedness?
Well, there are no magic formula for this kind of thing. These things take a long time. But if I were to say 5 or 6 things, then first thing would be to reform our national security structure, which implies that you bring the armed forces into the structure of the government of India. Right now, they are outside it, which means create a chief of defense staff and bring him into by either an act of parliament or rewriting the rules of business. Recognize that there's a chief of defense staff, this is his job. There's a chief of army staff, this is what he's supposed to do. Today there is nothing. Nowhere is it written, not in the Constitution of India. The rules of business don't mention any of the chiefs. So I would say step number 1 and 2 would be creation of a chief of defense staff and their recognition in the edifice of the government of India. Then along with that, integrate the armed forces headquarters with the Ministry of Defense. Today, after the group of ministers recommended it, they said, okay, we will integrate them. So naval headquarters is called integrated headquarters of MOD, in brackets Navy. Army headquarters is called integrated headquarters of MOD, Army. Air Force decided to disregard it. So for the last 11 years, they are calling themselves air headquarters. Nobody's batted an eyelid. So integrate them actually so that they function in a collegiate manner with their civilian colleagues. Next thing I would say, one of the most important, that professionalize the IAS cadre and the IDAS cadre who are going to function in national security. Create a national security cadre of people who know all about national security, about military hardware, about acquisitions, about contract management, where we go wrong. Specialize in them in this, then make them work in the MOD, in the MEA, even in the Ministry of Home Affairs. So this is a very vital step, because unless you have a specialized cadre which knows how to, because uniformed people move in and out, A civilian can stay in New Delhi for 5, 10, 15 years. And if he knows what he's doing, then he's an invaluable asset. Then form theatre commands. So I think I've mentioned 5 or 6 issues, but they need to be tackled as soon as possible. We can manage without them, but we will continue to remain in a mess, and the day the cookie crumbles, we may have to pay a dear price.
My last question, I mean, in this regard, do you think it's a good idea to have a national security strategy document? Because earlier you mentioned that it may not be a good idea to publicize the CAG report and the Standing Committee on Defense reports, etc., because these things give out a lot of things. So in that context, do you think it's a good idea for the country to have a national security strategy document in place?
Let me clarify. I only mentioned those 2 documents because they reveal your weaknesses. It says MiG-29 is not flying, so many tanks are not working. Why should we tell the whole world about things that are going wrong? So in that context, I said those documents should be classified and only people who are concerned should learn. We must have a national security strategy because it will tell everybody, our friends, our adversaries around us, what is the intention of this Republic of India? What are the red lines that it draws? Where will it take a stand, and where can we fool around with it? It will also tell our people. It will tell the Army, Navy and Air Force what kind of task we have to provide. Then they will buy the right kind of weapons for it. Today, anybody can say, I want 10 aircraft carriers or 100 in the fighter squadrons. Who's to question you? But then the nation, the government is telling the armed forces that these are our national interests which need to be safeguarded. And now you create a Navy, Army, Air Force which will meet these tasks. So it has a tremendous value. And of course, it will tell people where is the red line. Now, I'll give you just one example. About 20 years ago, this business of cross-border terrorism started. We invented this term cross-border terrorism. Actually, it was people being trained in Pakistan, armed by Pakistan, pushed across the border by Pakistan with covering artillery fire, small arms fire. They were given directions and orders on the radio. It is invasion. Anybody crosses your borders and comes into your country is aggression. And that's how it should be treated. If we had a national security strategy which said that any violation of my border will be treated as aggression, and it will be treated as such, and we will retaliate.
Sends a message.
But we call them cross-border terrorism. Then we said they are non-state actors. So promptly Pakistan said, oh, they are freedom fighters. So we just allowed people to take advantage of our woolly thinking and not addressing issues and not putting our red lines. You try firing one rocket at Israel, you know what happens. Because they've laid down the red lines. You do something to us and we... So similarly, if you had laid down your red lines 20 years ago, maybe the situation wouldn't have arisen. So you must have a strategy, you must have a doctrine. But I would only have one caveat, that limit it to... Because when you talk about national security, today academics like you say that national security covers the environment, food security, energy security, human rights, gender equality. It's a vast subject. We don't need that. Nobody has time. So our national security strategy should be confined to defense, maybe foreign relations, intelligence. In these 2 or 3 areas, provide guidance. Or
although the academic argument is that security is different from national security. National security doesn't need to be concerned about gender equality.
Okay, but divide a line,
security
because
itself.
You can look at food security and
as a
separate issue. There can be, there are other people.
Different baskets of security.
But today our dire need is to have clear-cut, directions and interests, identified as to what the armed forces need to do, what the intelligence agencies need to do, and the defense production part of it, military-industrial complex.
And that document should be publicized?
It should be publicized. Well, one version can be public, another version can be classified.
Right. Arnab Prakash, wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Nice being here.